On Christmas morning 1945, a family in West Virginia woke up to find their two-story house burning to the ground. 4 children made it out. 5 of their children vanished inside. The local fire department ruled the blaze a tragic accident and closed the case in a matter of hours. But when investigators sifted through the ashes, they found the metal frames of beds and warped kitchen appliances. What they did not find was a single human bone, a fragment of skull, or a tooth. The official death certificates were issued, but the parents refused to accept them. Over the next 40 years, they conducted their own investigation, uncovering a deeply unsettling trail of physical evidence that suggested their children never died in that fire at all. George Sodder was born in Sardinia, Italy. He crossed the Atlantic alone at 13, settled in the Appalachian town of Fayetteville, and built a successful trucking company hauling coal and dirt. He and his wife, Jennie, were well respected, raising 10 children in a modest, hard-working household. But George was also deeply vocal about his political views. He regularly and loudly expressed his hatred for the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, a position that drew deep resentment from fascist sympathizers living quietly within the local immigrant community. The animosity eventually arrived at his doorstep. In October of 1945, a traveling life insurance salesman visited the property. When George declined to buy a policy, the man reportedly warned him that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed, citing George's remarks about Mussolini as the reason. Weeks later, a different stranger showed up asking for work. After George turned him away, the man wandered to the back of the house, examined the fuse boxes, and warned that they would cause a fire someday. George had just paid to have the entire house professionally rewired and inspected. 2 explicit threats from 2 separate strangers. Both occurred barely 2 months before the house burned down. On the night of December 24th, 9 of the 10 Sodder children were home. The family celebrated late into the evening, and the youngest were allowed to stay up playing with their new toys before finally heading upstairs to the attic to sleep. Just after midnight, a series of strange disturbances began. Jennie was woken by a phone call from an unfamiliar woman, asking for a name she didn't recognize. In the background, she heard glasses clinking and an unsettling, strange laughter. Checking the house, she found the downstairs lights still on and the front curtains left open. Less than an hour later, Jennie woke again to the smell of smoke. A fire was rapidly spreading near George's home office, starting directly next to the fuse boxes, the exact area the stranger had focused on weeks earlier. George ran outside to grab the ladder he kept propped against the house every night, intending to climb to the attic window and pull the 5 sleeping children out. The ladder was entirely missing. He then ran to the rain barrel to scoop water, only to find it frozen solid. Desperate, he sprinted to his 2 coal trucks, planning to drive one beneath the window to use as a makeshift platform. Both engines, which had worked perfectly the day before, refused to turn over. Meanwhile, an older son ran to a neighbor's house to call for help, but the town's party line operator never answered. The vehicles were dead, the communication lines were unresponsive, the primary rescue tool had vanished, the means of saving the children had been methodically neutralized. By the time the fire department finally arrived hours later, the structure was a smoking foundation. The fire chief quickly concluded that the blaze had burned hot enough to completely vaporize 5 children in under an hour. A typical 1940s residential fire peaks at 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit for 60 minutes.
But complete cremation requires a sustained 2,000 degrees for over 2 hours. The Sodder fire did its damage in half the time, at half the temperature. The anomalies extended beyond the ashes. Days later, George's missing ladder was found tossed into a ravine roughly 75 feet from the property. An inspection of his dead trucks revealed signs of tampering. Then came the discovery of the telephone line. A repairman discovered that the wire leading to the Sodder house had not burned down in the fire. It had been cleanly severed with tools. The severed wire, the relocated ladder, and the tampered engines directly contradict the official finding of a tragic accident. The physical record outlines an active, thoroughly prepared crime scene. In the weeks following the blaze, sightings of the missing children began to surface. A woman operating a hotel in Charleston, 50 miles away, reported that 4 children matching the Sodders' descriptions checked in late on the night of the fire. They were accompanied by 2 adults who actively blocked her from speaking to the children, communicating rapidly in Italian among themselves. The local investigation yielded equally strange behavior. The same fire chief who insisted the children had vaporized later confessed to a local minister that he had actually discovered a human organ in the ashes, which he secretly buried in a dynamite box on the property. When the Sodders exhumed it, a funeral director confirmed the contents showed no signs of fire damage, identifying the tissue as untempered beef liver. Years later, the family hired a private investigator who managed to recover a few actual bone fragments from the dirt at the site. Seeking a definitive answer, they mailed the fragments to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. The Smithsonian's analysis returned an impossible result. The bones belonged to an individual between 16 and 22 years old, older than the oldest missing Sodder child. Furthermore, the fragments showed no signs of exposure to high temperatures. They were subsequently lost from the official chain of custody, erasing the only forensic evidence available for modern DNA testing. In 1952, George and Jennie erected a massive billboard along Route 16, displaying the faces of their 5 missing children and offering a significant reward. Decades later, they received a cryptic photograph in the mail from Kentucky, showing a young man who bore a striking resemblance to their missing son Louis, accompanied by a string of numbers nobody could decipher. The Sodders maintained that billboard for nearly 40 years. Their persistence was a rational response to an establishment that repeatedly fabricated, ignored, or lost the most critical evidence in the case. Reviewing the historical record leaves 2 distinct ways to read the events of December 24, 1945. The first relies on a sequence of terrible luck. It proposes that the frozen barrel, the dead engines, and the cut phone line were grim coincidences, combining with a uniquely destructive structure fire to create an inescapable trap. Under this theory, a devastated family, entirely unequipped to process the sudden loss of 5 children, sought out malicious patterns in the random chaos of a tragedy. The second theory suggests a calculated operation. It proposes that George Sodder's political remarks made him a target, leading operatives to sever his communications, disable his vehicles, remove his ladder, and extract the children, using the fire strictly to destroy the evidence of the abduction. The truth remains obscured by time and missing forensic data. George and Jennie passed away without ever receiving a definitive answer, leaving the disappearance of the 5 Sodder children as a permanent, haunting void in American history.